My name is Dr. Jonas Dematis. This is a really fun and interesting course. We get to listen to a lot of music, to 2,000 years worth of music. We learn vocabulary so that we can talk about music in an educated and informed manner. And we ask great philosophical questions like, what is music? Why study music? Is there good music and bad music? And how do you know? Let's start by listening to some music. We will engage in 3 short listening exercises. You can listen to these exercises on your CD, but we will also listen to them together in this lecture. And what I want you to do when you listen is to choose 5 adjectives to describe the music you hear. So what words would you use, what adjectives would you use to describe the music that you're listening to? Does this music sound like it is sacred, in other words, connected to religious practice, or secular, not connected to religious practice? And how do you know? And finally, which instruments do you hear? See if you can decipher which instruments you hear, or if you don't hear any instruments at all. Let's start with listening example number 1. You don't need to know anything about this example just yet. It is a plain chant called In Paradisum.
In Paradisum, educante angeli, in tuo adventum, suscipiante matures, et perducante in civitatem sancta Jerusalem. Chorus angelorum Jesu sipiat, et cum Lazarum quam nam pauper,
All right, let's move on to listening exercise number 2. This is the Brandenburg Concerto number 5, and we are going to listen to Movement 1. This is by Baroque composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Again, you don't need to know any of that quite yet. Just listen and choose 5 adjectives to describe the music that you hear. Does this sound like sacred music or secular music? And how do you know? And which instruments do you hear? right, and now let us move on to listening exercise number 3. We are listening to a scene from Wozzeck, a modern contemporary opera by Alban Berg, and this will sound very, very different from the other 2 examples. All right, so obviously a very, very different musical example there. So if you were asked to tell somebody about all of the music you just listened to, what would you say? How would you describe the music? What would you say about the instruments you heard? What would you say about who might have written the music? Or how this piece of music might have changed the history of music itself? And this semester, it is my goal to help you achieve that ability. And we will partake in 4 activities this semester. We will listen to famous pieces of classic music, right? And this music is classic or classical, you may have heard, because it never goes out of style. Even though some of these pieces were written 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, people still like to listen to it, right? So that's what makes it classic. So you will be introduced to some of the most famous pieces of Western art music, and I'm sure you'll recognize many of them. You'll have heard them on television, on the radio, in cartoons, perhaps without even having realized it. In addition, you will develop your listening skills. And what does this mean? Well, I will help you become an active listener. So rather than putting on a piece of music, especially Western art music, and letting it play in the background while you're doing something else, instead, you will become accustomed to listening actively to music, to listening to how the melody flows, how the harmony works, how the rhythm moves, whether the piece is from the Baroque era or from the Renaissance, which instruments you are hearing, and so on. And of course, the course will help you develop a musical vocabulary. How can you talk about what you are hearing in a manner that will help somebody else truly understand the ideas you are trying to get across? And finally, we will situate the music that we're listening to in its historical and cultural context. And I can't emphasize enough just how important cultural context is. A lot of the music that we listen to, or all of the music that we listen to, sounds the way it does because of the way in which it was positioned in its cultural context. Think about the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, the second listening example we just heard. It might have sounded very, very different if Johann Sebastian Bach, pictured here in a humorous photo, had at his disposal an electric guitar. Of course, there were no electric instruments while Bach was composing, but imagine if there had existed these instruments at that time. Would Bach's music have sounded very, very different, right? Or if Vivaldi had spent his time working for King Louis XIV in France, rather than for an orphanage in Venice, would he have composed very different music? And you can ask this question about any kind of music you listen to, not just about Western art music. For example, why does hip-hop sound the way that it does? Why does rock sound the way that it does? Again, a lot of what you learn in this course doesn't apply only to Western art music, but actually is relevant when you are talking about many musical styles: pop, rock, jazz, rap, and so on. So there are really broad applications of the knowledge you will attain in this course. All right, so very, very important. I can't emphasize this enough. I even put it in bright red, bold writing for you. Musical style is directly connected to social and historical context, or cultural and historical context. Who is writing, when they are writing, why they are writing music, and who is performing the music greatly affects the end result. Okay, so in this class we are talking about Western art music, and I'm sure you've heard the term classical music a lot, and really that's a synonym for Western art music. I avoid the term classical music in this course because classical music actually refers to a very, very distinct period of time, for about 100 years, when composers were writing in a particular classical style. So it gets a little confusing to call the entire tradition classical music. So we have chosen instead to call the tradition Western art music. And because I use this term in this course, let's just quickly define what is Western art music. There are 4 basic elements in the definition of Western art music. Firstly, it is a very complex music tradition. Right, so these are pieces of music that are very, very complicated and that are so complex that they have been written down in an advanced notation system. Right? If you have an entire symphony by Beethoven, it would be too hard to teach everybody their parts without having the music written down. So it's a complex music tradition. It also comprises sacred and secular music. So we've already mentioned those terms earlier. Sacred music is music that is connected to religion in some way, and secular music is music that is not connected to religion. Western art music also spans a very, very, very long time period, right? Over 2,000 years of music. So this is a long tradition, a complex tradition, and a written tradition, and it encompasses sacred and secular music. And what do we mean by Western? Well, this is a complicated term, and I don't want to get too deeply into the complexities of the term right now, but for the purposes of this course, Western simply refers to Western Europe and North America, because the music that we listen to will have been composed either by people living in Western Europe or by people living in North America. Okay, so because we have 2,000 years of music to cover, musicologists have tried to make this a little bit more manageable, this huge amount of music, by dividing it into categories, into time periods or different eras. And the music is divided chronologically, but it is also divided according to style. So, for example, music composed in the Middle Ages will sound very different from music composed in the Renaissance, and that music will sound different stylistically from contemporary music, which will sound different from romantic music, and so on. So these are chronological categories, but they are also stylistic categories, and hopefully in this course you will start to recognize when you hear a piece of music whether it is from the Baroque era, the Middle Ages, the contemporary period, and so on. You should commit these to memory, so take a moment to write them down. This is the backbone, the skeleton of Western art music history, so it's very important that you know these periods. We begin with the Middle Ages. This is where we have our earliest evidence of Western art music in the form of chants, plain chants, like we listened to earlier in the church. And this is a very, very long period in which music did not change too drastically stylistically. That spans from 450 to 1450. Then we move on to the Renaissance, 1450 to 1600, where this liturgical music begins to become more complicated. Then we have the Baroque period, the Baroque era, from 1600 to 1750. This is a time when secular music became popular and instrumental music arose. Then we move on to the classical period, 1750 to 1820, as composers experimented with different ways of writing instrumental and vocal music. We move on to the Romantic period, 1820 to 1900, which is just what it sounds. Music became very, very emotional and romantic. And then the Contemporary period, 1900. Oops, I have 2013 here. It's already 2015, but you get the idea. It's all the way until the music that's composed today, to this day. And contemporary music encompasses a very, very broad variety of styles. All right, so those are our 6 time periods. One more element to take into account when you're trying to figure out if you're listening to Western art music or not is which instruments are used in the compositions. And a hint that will help you understand that you are listening to Western art music is if the music is written for either voice or voices in a choir, right, or a choir, or for instruments that are found in the symphony orchestra. Right? So we will talk about the instruments in an orchestra a little bit later, but an orchestra includes instruments like violins, violas, cellos, bassoons, drums, French horns, flutes. Right? So all of those instruments are very, very common in the Western art music tradition. Okay, so we move on now to the real meat of Unit 1, and this is the elements of music. So we are going to start learning about basic musical vocabulary that you are going to use throughout the course. You're going to use this whether you're talking about music from the Renaissance or contemporary music. You're going to use these words when you write your concert report and when you just discuss music in general, even other kinds of music that do not fall within the Western art music category. So of course we begin with a definition of music. Right? What is music? This is actually a deceptively complex question. Right? Music, we know, is what comes out of the speakers of our car radio. It's what we hear when singers sing and when musicians play instruments. Generally, the term music is applied to certain sounds that we enjoy hearing. Right? And your definition that you have in your textbook is music is the art of sound in time. The art of sound in time. So shaping sound so that it is beautiful. Another definition that you might enjoy is music is humanly organized sound. Now, why would I offer this definition? Well, we know that sound is involved in some way when you're listening to music, but who decides whether a sound is music or not? Where are the boundaries between sound and noise, or sound and silence? Or is there such thing as silence? So when we talk about music as humanly organized sound, we are referencing not only the people that are making the music, but also the people that are listening to the music. If I hear some sounds and I consider them to be music, then they are music. I have organized them in my mind as music. If you are listening to the same sound and you don't consider it to be music, then it is not music. It is not humanly organized sound. All right? So that is just to get a little bit deeper into the philosophical question of what is music. But to thoroughly answer the question, what is music, or how can we talk about music as the art of sound in time, we need to mention all these technical aspects of music: instruments, notes, scales, rhythm, tempo, harmony, chords, melody, and so on. Right? So let's begin. We begin with a discussion of rhythm. This term, rhythm, talks about or references how music unfolds in time. So how does music move in time? Right? This is the time aspect of music. How do we arrange notes? How do we arrange silences in music? And there are many, many different terms that you see on the screen. Beat, measure, syncopation, accent, tempo, meter. All these terms help us describe rhythm. Okay? So rhythm refers to the way in which music unfolds in time. Now, what determines the way in which a piece unfolds in time? Well, there are various factors, and let's go over these now. So let's start by talking about the term beat. What is a beat? Well, a beat provides the basic unit of measurement for time in music. So a beat is the basic unit of measurement of time in music. Right? And a really helpful way to think about this is to think of a clock. Now, clock time is measured in seconds, in even ticks as the little hand goes around. Think of the beat as the little hand in music. So the beat is the constant sense that time is moving along in music. To put it another way, when you listen to music and you start to tap your foot, you are most likely tapping the beat. Here is an example of me tapping to the beat as I listen to a musical example. So let's go back to our Bach example. So could you feel that? That steady sense of pulse that runs throughout the music. That is the beat. Okay, I'm going to keep the screen small for a little while because we're going to jump back and forth to the music again. So now, a beat differs a little bit from the ticking of a clock because not all beats in music are emphasized evenly. Some beats are emphasized more than others. So when a beat is emphasized, it is accented. Right? The beat has an accent. And actually, in nearly all pieces of Western art music, there are accented and unaccented beats. And these are also called strong beats and weak beats. And this is precisely what helps organize the rhythm aspect of a piece of music. So as I tap my hand this time while listening to the Bach example, I'm going to tap out the accented and unaccented beats, the strong beats and the weak beats. Strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. All right, so accented notes, strong beats, and weak beats. Now in music, the strong beats and the weak beats are organized into certain patterns. You'll notice in the example I just tapped out, strong, weak, over and over again. So there's a name for this recurring pattern of strong and weak beats, and that is known as a meter. Okay, so a meter is a strong, weak pattern of beats that is repeated again and again throughout a piece. So the meter we just heard, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's repeated again and again from the start of the piece to the end of the piece. Now there are two ways of organizing beats in a meter. Right? You can have duple meter and you can have triple meter. Duple meter means that the beats are grouped into two into groups of 2. So strong, weak, like we just heard. Triple meter means that the beats are grouped into groups of 3. Strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak. Okay, so we have meter, which is how you group the beats together. And you can do this in groups of 2, or you can do this in groups of 3. And now it can actually even get a little bit more complicated, because you don't only have to have 2 beats together, you can have 4 beats together, which is a duple meter, or you can have 8 beats together, which is a duple meter, or 16, right? Or different variations of triple meter. You can have 3 beats together, or 6 beats together, or 9 beats together. All right, so duple meter and triple meter. If it's divisible by 2, it's likely in duple meter. If it's divisible by 3, it's likely in triple meter. Okay? And composers actually indicate this visually on the score. So when a composer sits down to write a piece of music, he divides the notes into the meters by drawing little boxes on the score. Each little box, each little section has, let's say if it's in duple meter, we'll have 2 beats, or 4 beats, or 8 beats, right? Or if it's in triple meter, it will have 3 beats, or 6 beats, or 9 beats, right? And this little box that contains one grouping of the meter is known as a measure. Right? So a measure contains one of these groups of strong and weak beats. So a long piece might have 2,000 measures of strong, weak, or 500 measures of strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak. Now let's say you're tapping your foot while you're listening to a piece of music, right? It's in duple meter, and you're enjoying yourself, everything's going on fine, and suddenly it sounds like a musician made a mistake and they emphasized the wrong beat. So if you're counting strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, and suddenly you hear strong, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, strong, weak, right? And something seems incorrect, and you think, oh, the musician must have made a mistake. Well, actually, this is a really neat trick that composers use to make the rhythm move more quickly or more slowly, and to make the music really exciting for the listener. And this technique is called syncopation. Right? So syncopation is when you make a sudden rhythmic change in the music and you emphasize a weak beat. Right? So you emphasize a weak beat rather than a strong beat. Right? And if you listen to jazz, if you listen to ragtime, and a lot of classical music as well, you will hear a lot of syncopation. We'll hear syncopation a lot this semester. Okay, so we have one more large rhythm term, and that is tempo. Tempo is an Italian word that simply describes the speed of the music. So how fast or how slow a piece of music passes by in time. Right? How quickly do the regular beats of the meter follow one another? Now, one trick that composers use when they are writing a piece of music and they want the musician to play in a certain tempo, right, at a certain speed, is to indicate a number on a metronome. What is a metronome, you might ask? Well, a metronome is a rather annoying mechanical little box that you see there on the right-hand side of your screen that you can turn it on with a little start-stop button there, and you set the tempo. So you tell the machine how quickly to tap out beats, right? So let's say if you set the metronome to 60, you will hear a tap once every second, right? 1 beat every second. If you set the metronome to 120, you'll hear 2 beats every second. Right? So the metronome keeps time, and it helps composers tell the musicians, right, how quickly to play their pieces. That's why we know just how quickly to play a piece by Verdi, who passed away hundreds of years ago, but he left us tempo markings, so we know just how quickly to play his piece. Now, in addition to these numbers, there are also terms, more Italian terms that talk about speed of the piece. So in many cases, composers don't actually leave specific numbers, but they write these general tempo markings. Okay, and these are really important to know. I do want you to learn these, the 5 terms on the left-hand side of your screen. When you attend your concert and write your concert report, you will be using these terms. So if you hear a piece of music that is very, very slow, the appropriate tempo marking is adagio. If you hear a piece that's slow, not too slow, but it's still pretty slow, then the tempo marking is andante. If you hear a piece that's moderately paced, almost like a walking pace or a little bit slower, that is moderato. If you hear a fast-paced piece that's really lively, that is allegro. And if you hear a piece that is very, very fast, almost too fast to be able to tap your foot and keep time, that is presto. So we have adagio, andante, moderato, allegro, and presto. Right? So those are the important tempo markings that you should learn. Okay, this brings the Unit 1 video lesson to a close. Please consult your syllabus for this week's readings, listening examples on the CD and or the DVD, and complete the other assignments that are due. Thank you.